Welcome back, horror fans, to BitBlitz Horror. Tonight we're diving into the lunar plague, a chilling tale of moonlit terror. As a mysterious virus transforms a quiet town into a nightmare, survivors must fight for their lives against an ever-growing horde of infected. Lock your doors, turn up the volume, and prepare for a night of spine-tingling horror. Let's begin. The lunar plague. As the full moon rose over the sleepy town of Oakridge, an eerie silence settled upon the streets. The usual chirping of crickets and rustling of leaves had ceased, replaced by an unsettling stillness that sent shivers down the spines of the few residents still awake at this late hour. Dr. Elena Rodriguez peered through her microscope, her brow furrowed in concentration. The sample before her was unlike anything she had ever encountered in her years of virology research. The virus she was studying seemed to defy the laws of nature, mutating at an alarming rate and exhibiting properties that bordered on the impossible. A sudden noise from outside her lab startled her, causing her to jump. She glanced at the clock, 11:47 p.m. The research facility should have been empty at this hour. Cautiously, she made her way to the window, her heart pounding in her chest. What she saw made her blood run cold. A group of figures shambled across the parking lot, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Even from this distance, Elena could see that something was terribly wrong with them. Their skin was pale and mottled, their eyes vacant and glassy. As one of them passed under a streetlight, she caught a glimpse of fresh blood smeared around its mouth. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It can't be." But deep down, she knew the truth. The virus she had been studying, the one that had seemed so impossible, had somehow escaped containment. And now, it was loose in the town. Elena's mind raced. She had to warn someone, had to stop this before it spread further. But as she reached for her phone, the lights in the lab flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. A low, guttural moan echoed through the hallway outside her lab. They were inside the building. The outbreak begins. Tom Baker yawned as he pulled into the gas station, the digital clock on his dashboard reading 12:03 a.m. As a long-haul trucker, he was used to these late-night pit stops. But something about tonight felt off. The air seemed thick with tension, and an inexplicable sense of dread settled in the pit of his stomach. As he filled up his tank, movement caught his eye. A figure emerged from the shadows behind the convenience store, stumbling and swaying as if drunk. Tom's first instinct was to ignore it. He'd seen plenty of late-night drunks in his travels. But something about this person's movements seemed wrong. "Hey, buddy," Tom called out. "You all right?" The figure turned towards him, and Tom's blood ran cold. In the harsh fluorescent light of the gas station, he could see that the person's face was a mess of torn flesh and congealed blood. Their eyes, milky white and unseeing, fixed on Tom with predatory intensity. Before Tom could react, the creature lunged at him with inhuman speed. He felt the searing pain as teeth sank into his forearm, tearing through flesh and muscle. Tom screamed, a primal sound of terror and agony that echoed through the empty night. With all his strength, he managed to push the attacker away, scrambling back into his truck and slamming the door shut. His hands shook as he fumbled with the keys, the creature outside clawing at the window with bloodied fingers. As Tom peeled out of the gas station, his mind reeled. What the hell had just happened? Was he dreaming? The throbbing pain in his arm told him this was all too real. He needed to get help, needed to warn someone. But as he drove through the darkened streets of Oakridge, he realized with growing horror that the nightmare was just beginning. The virus spreads. Detective Michael Chin rubbed his tired eyes as he stared at the police scanner. It had been a quiet night in Oakridge, until about 20 minutes ago. Now, reports were flooding in from all over town, attacks, disturbances, and increasingly panicked calls about monsters and zombies. "This has to be some kind of sick prank," he muttered to himself, but the knot in his stomach told him otherwise. His radio crackled to life. "All units, we have multiple reports of violent assaults at Oakridge General Hospital. Proceed with extreme caution." Michael grabbed his gun and badge, a sense of foreboding washing over him as he headed for his patrol car. As he drove towards the hospital, the streets were eerily empty, save for the occasional shadowy figure that darted between buildings. The scene at the hospital was chaos. Screams echoed from within the building, and panicked people streamed out of the emergency entrance. Michael's jaw dropped as he saw a doctor being chased by what appeared to be a patient. But the patient's movements were jerky and unnatural, its mouth open in a silent snarl. Drawing his weapon, Michael approached cautiously. "Police! Freeze!" he shouted. The creature turned towards him, and Michael felt his blood run cold. Its face was a mask of horror, skin pale and mottled, eyes milky white, mouth smeared with fresh blood. It lunged at him with inhuman speed. Michael fired, the gunshot echoing in the night. The creature stumbled but didn't fall. It kept coming, seemingly unfazed by the bullet wound in its chest. "What the hell?" Michael whispered, backing away in terror. More figures emerged from the hospital, all bearing the same horrific appearance. Michael realized with growing dread that this was no prank, no isolated incident. Something terrible had been unleashed upon Oakridge, and he was witnessing the beginning of a nightmare, the full moon's curse. As the full moon reached its zenith in the night sky, its pale light cast an eerie glow over Oakridge. The town, once peaceful and unremarkable, had transformed into a landscape of terror in a matter of hours. 17-year-old Lily Chen huddled in her bedroom closet, her hands clamped over her mouth to stifle her sobs. Downstairs, she could hear the sounds of her parents, or what used to be her parents, shuffling through the house, low moans escaping their throats. It had happened so fast. Her father had come home late from work, complaining of feeling ill. Within an hour, he had transformed into something else. Her mother, trying to help him, had been bitten. And now, Lily was alone, trapped in her own home with the monsters that wore her parents' faces. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend, Jake. "Are you okay? Something's wrong. People are going crazy. Meet me at school gym." Lily's heart raced. The school wasn't far, but to get there, she'd have to leave the relative safety of her closet and venture out into a world gone mad. But what choice did she have? Gathering her courage, she slowly opened the closet door. The house had gone quiet, too quiet. She crept down the hallway, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot in the silence. As she reached the top of the stairs, she saw them. Her parents stood in the living room, their backs to her. But at the sound of her footstep, they turned, fixing their milky white eyes upon her. Lily screamed. The survivors. The school gymnasium was a fortress of desperation. Survivors huddled together in small groups, their faces pale with shock and fear. Among them was Jake, who rushed to embrace Lily as she stumbled through the doors. "You made it," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I was so scared you wouldn't." Lily couldn't speak, the horrors she had witnessed on her journey here still fresh in her mind. The streets had been a war zone, cars abandoned, buildings on fire, and everywhere, the infected. Running, shambling, attacking anything that moved. "What's happening, Jake?" she finally managed to ask. Is this real?" Before Jake could answer, a commotion near the gym entrance caught their attention. A group of newcomers had arrived, led by a haggard-looking police officer and a woman in a lab coat. "Listen up, everyone." The officer, Detective Chin, Lily recognized him from around town, called out. "I know you're all scared, but we need to stay calm and work together if we're going to survive this." The woman in the lab coat stepped forward. "My name is Dr. Elena Rodriguez. I'm afraid I may be partially responsible for what's happening." A murmur ran through the crowd. Elena held up her hands, pleading for silence. The virus that's causing this. It was never meant to leave the lab. We were studying its unusual properties, trying to understand how it could potentially revolutionize medicine. But something went wrong. It mutated, became more aggressive than we ever imagined possible. So what do we do? Someone in the crowd shouted. How do we stop it? Elena's face fell. I don't know. The virus seems to be spreading through bites, but it's also airborne to some degree. And those infected, they don't respond to normal stimuli. They don't feel pain, they don't tire. They just hunt. The gym fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. They were facing an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be stopped by conventional means. Lily felt Jake's hand tighten around hers. She looked up at the high windows of the gym, where the full moon still shone brightly. Its light, once beautiful and mysterious, now seemed malevolent, a silent witness to the horror unfolding below. The plan. As dawn broke over Oakridge, the survivors in the gym took stock of their situation. The infected seemed to be less active during daylight hours, giving them a brief respite to plan their next move. Detective Chin had taken charge, organizing the survivors into groups. Some were tasked with fortifying the gym, others with taking inventory of their supplies. Dr. Rodriguez worked tirelessly, examining those who had close encounters with the infected but escaped unbitten. Lily and Jake found themselves assigned to a scouting party, tasked with venturing out to gather more supplies and look for other survivors. As they prepared to leave, Lily couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her stomach. We'll be okay, Jake reassured her, seeing the fear in her eyes. We've got each other's backs, right? Lily nodded, trying to summon up a brave smile. But as they stepped out into the eerily quiet streets of Oakridge, she couldn't help but wonder if any of them would ever truly be okay again. The town was a wasteland. Cars lay abandoned, some still idling. Doors hung open on houses and shops, their occupants fled or worse. And everywhere, there were signs of violence. Broken windows, bloodstains on the pavement, and the occasional motionless form that no one wanted to examine too closely. As they moved cautiously down Main Street, a sound made them all freeze. A low, guttural moan echoed from a nearby alley. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as Jake raised his makeshift weapon, a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. From the shadows emerged one of the infected. Its clothes were torn and bloodied, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. But its milky white eyes fixed on the group with predatory intensity. Run! Detective Chin yelled, but it was too late. More infected poured out of the surrounding buildings, drawn by the sound of living prey. The scouting party scattered, their carefully laid plans disintegrating in the face of the horde. Lily ran, her lungs burning, Jake's hand clasped tightly in hers. Behind them, she could hear the screams of those less fortunate, the sounds of terror and agony mixing with the inhuman shrieks of the infected. They ducked into an abandoned convenience store, barricading the door behind them. As they caught their breath, Lily realized with horror that they were now cut off from the rest of the group. What do we do now? She whispered, her voice trembling. Jake's face was pale, but his jaw was set with determination. We survive, he said. Whatever it takes, we survive. Outside, the moans of the infected grew louder as more converged on their location. Lily and Jake huddled together in the back of the store, surrounded by shelves of snack foods and soft drinks that seemed like relics from another world. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the store's grimy windows, Lily couldn't help but think of the full moon that would soon rise again. Would this night be their last? Or was there still hope for survival in this new, terrifying world? The turning point. Days turned into weeks, and the survivors of Oakridge fought a constant battle for survival. The infected seemed to be growing in number, despite their best efforts to contain the spread of the virus. Hope was running thin, and tensions among the survivors were reaching a breaking point. Dr. Rodriguez worked tirelessly in her makeshift lab, set up in what used to be the school's science classroom. She was running on caffeine and determination, desperate to find a way to stop the virus before it was too late. One night, as the full moon once again cast its eerie glow over the town, Elena made a breakthrough. She burst into the gym where the survivors were gathered, her eyes wild with excitement and lack of sleep. "I think I've found something," she announced, her voice hoarse. "The virus. It's not just responding to the full moon. It's being amplified by it." Detective Chen frowned. "What do you mean?" Elena held up a vial of cloudy liquid. "This is a sample of the virus. Watch what happens when I expose it to moonlight." She placed the vial in a beam of moonlight streaming through the window. To everyone's astonishment, the liquid began to glow faintly, pulsing in rhythm with some unseen force. "The lunar radiation is activating something in the virus's genetic structure," Elena explained. "It's making it more aggressive, more virulent. But if we can disrupt this process, we might be able to weaken the infected." Lily finished, hope blooming in her chest for the first time in weeks. Elena nodded. "Exactly. But to do that, we need to get to my lab at the research facility. All my equipment is there, and there's a special radiation chamber we can use to test this theory." The survivors exchanged nervous glances. The research facility was on the other side of town, through areas heavily populated by the infected. It would be a dangerous journey, with no guarantee of success. "I'll go," Detective Chun volunteered. "I know the town better than anyone." "I'm coming too," Lily said, surprising herself with her own bravery. "I've been helping Dr. Rodriguez. I might be able to assist with the experiments." Jake immediately stepped forward. "Then I'm going as well. We stick together, remember?" In the end, a small group was assembled for the mission: Elena, Chen, Lily, Jake, and a few others who had proven themselves capable in combat against the infected. As they prepared to leave, Lily couldn't help but feel a mix of terror and exhilaration. This could be the key to saving not just Oakridge, but potentially the entire world. The final stand. The journey to the research facility was a nightmare. The streets were teeming with infected, their numbers seeming to grow with each passing hour. The group moved silently, using every scrap of stealth and cunning they had learned over the past weeks to avoid detection. As they approached the facility, a horrifying realization dawned on them. The building was surrounded by a massive horde of infected, all seemingly drawn to the place where the virus had first escaped. "There's no way through," Jake whispered, his face pale in the moonlight, but Chen's expression was grim and determined. "We don't have a choice. Whatever's in that lab is our only hope." With a deep breath, he stepped out into the open, firing his gun into the air. The sound echoed through the night, and as one, the horde turned towards him. "Go!" he shouted to the others. "I'll draw them away!" Before anyone could protest, Chen took off running, firing his gun periodically to keep the infected's attention. The majority of the horde followed, their inhuman shrieks filling the air. Lily felt tears stinging her eyes as they watched Chen disappear into the darkness. But there was no time for grief. They had to make his sacrifice count. The group sprinted for the facility entrance, dispatching the few infected that remained with brutal efficiency. Once inside, Elena led them through the maze-like corridors to her lab. As they barricaded themselves inside, the sounds of the horde returning echoed through the building. They had minutes, at most, before they were overrun. Elena worked feverishly, setting up the radiation chamber and preparing her samples. Lily assisted as best she could, her hands shaking with adrenaline and fear. "It's ready," Elena announced, just as the first infected began pounding on the lab door. "But someone needs to be in the chamber when we activate it. The radiation levels will be lethal." A heavy silence fell over the group as they processed Elena's words. The pounding on the door grew louder, the hinges starting to give way under the relentless assault of the infected. Jake stepped forward, his face set with determination. "I'll do it," he said quietly. No! Lily cried, grabbing his arm. There has to be another way. Elena shook her head, her eyes filled with sorrow. There's no time. If we don't do this now, everything we fought for will be lost. Jake turned to Lily, cupping her face in his hands. Hey, it's okay, he said softly. This is our chance to save everyone. To save you. Tears streamed down Lily's face as she pulled Jake into a fierce embrace. I can't lose you, she whispered. You won't, Jake promised. I'll always be with you. With a final, tender kiss, Jake broke away and stepped into the radiation chamber. Elena sealed the door behind him, her hands shaking as she moved to the control panel. Ready? She called out. Jake gave a thumbs up, his brave smile visible through the chamber's window. Elena took a deep breath and activated the chamber. A brilliant white light filled the room, accompanied by a high-pitched whine that drowned out even the sounds of the infected breaking through the door. Lily shielded her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, abruptly, the light faded and the noise ceased. In the sudden silence, they could hear a change in the sounds coming from outside. The frenzied shrieks of the infected had transformed into confused moans and whimpers. Elena rushed to her microscope, examining a sample of the virus. It's working, she exclaimed. The virus is breaking down, but Lily barely heard her. She was already at the chamber door, yanking it open. Jake stumbled out, his skin pale and clammy, but alive. Did it work? He asked weakly. Lily nodded, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. You did it, Jake. You saved us all. Aftermath. In the days that followed, the survivors watched in amazement as the infected slowly began to regain their humanity. The virus, weakened by the radiation pulse, lost its hold on its victims. Many were left with no memory of their time as monsters, while others were haunted by fragmented recollections of the horrors they had committed. Oakridge began the long process of rebuilding. The town had been devastated, both physically and emotionally, but there was a sense of hope that had been absent for so long. Dr. Rodriguez continued her work, developing a treatment to help those still suffering from the effects of the virus. Detective Chin, who had miraculously survived his heroic diversion, led efforts to restore law and order to the town. Lily and Jake, hailed as heroes for their role in ending the nightmare, found themselves struggling with the weight of their experiences. The horrors they had witnessed and the losses they had endured left deep scars that would take time to heal. One evening, as the sun set over Oakridge, Lily and Jake stood on a hill overlooking the town. The streets below were quiet, but not with the eerie stillness of those terrifying weeks. This was a peaceful quiet, the quiet of a town slowly coming back to life. Do you think it's really over? Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. I don't know if it will ever be completely over, he said honestly. But we survived. We're still here. And we're together. Lily leaned into him, drawing comfort from his presence. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, she felt a glimmer of hope for the future. They had faced the unimaginable and come out the other side. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. In the distance, the moon began to rise, no longer a harbinger of terror, but a reminder of the strength they had found within themselves and each other. The lunar plague had changed their world forever, but it had also shown them the incredible resilience of the human spirit. As night fell over Oakridge, Lily and Jake turned away from the view and began the walk back into town. There was still much work to be done, many wounds to heal. But for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright. The horror that had gripped Oakridge was over. Life would go on, forever changed but undefeated. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.